Chapter 1. Try to eat something, Will. Tomorrow's a big day after all. Jenny, blonde, pretty and cheerful, gestured toward Will's barely touched plate and smiled encouragingly at him. Will made an attempt to return the smile, but it was a dismal failure. He picked up the plate before him, piled high with his favorite foods. Tonight, his stomach knotted tight with tension and anticipation. He could hardly bring himself to swallow a bite. Tomorrow would be a big day, he knew. He knew it all too well, in fact. Tomorrow would be the biggest day in his life, because tomorrow was the choosing day, and it would determine how he spent the rest of his life. "Nerves, I imagine," said George, setting down his loaded fork and seizing the lapels of his jacket in a judicious manner. He was a thin, gangly, and studious boy, fascinated by rules and regulations and with a penchant for examining and debating both sides of any question, sometimes at great length. "Dreadful thing, nervousness. It can just freeze you up just so you can't think, can't eat, can't speak." "I'm not nervous," Will said quickly, noticing that Horace had looked up, ready to form a sarcastic comment. George nodded several times, considering Will's statement. "On the other hand," he added, "a little nervousness can actually improve performance. It can heighten your perception and sharpen your reactions. So, the fact that you are worried, if in fact you are, is not necessarily something to be worried about, of itself, so to speak." In spite of himself, a wry smile touched Will's mouth. George would be a natural in the legal profession, he thought. He would almost certainly be the scribe master's choice on the following morning. Perhaps, Will thought, that was at the heart of his own problem. He was the only one of the ward mates who had any fears about the choosing that would take place within 12 hours. "He ought to be nervous," Horace scoffed. "After all, which craft master's going to want him as an apprentice?" "I'm sure we're all nervous," Alice said. She directed one of her rare smiles at Will. "We'd be stupid not to be." "Well, I'm not," Horace said, then reddened as Alice raised one eyebrow and Jenny giggled. It was typical of Alice, Will thought. He knew that the tall, graceful girl had already been promised a place as an apprentice by Lady Pauline, head of Castle Redmont's diplomatic service. Her pretense that she was nervous about the following day, and her tact in refraining from pointing out Horace's gaffe, showed that she was already a diplomat of some skill. Jenny, of course, would gravitate immediately to the castle kitchens, domain of Master Chubb, Redmont's head chef. He was a man renowned throughout the kingdom for the banquets served in the castle's massive dining hall. Jenny loved food and cooking, and her easy-going nature and unfailing good humor would make her an invaluable staff member in the turmoil of the castle kitchens. Battle school would be Horace's choice. Will glanced at his ward mate now, hungrily tucking into the roast turkey, ham and potatoes that he had heaped onto his plate. Horace was big for his age and a natural athlete. The chances that he would be refused were virtually non-existent. Horace was exactly the type of recruit that Sir Rodney looked for in his warrior apprentices. Strong, athletic, and fit. And thought Will a trifle sourly not too bright. Battle school was the path to knighthood for boys like Horace, born commoners but with the physical abilities to serve as knights of the kingdom. Which left Will. What would his choice be? More importantly, as Horace had pointed out, what craftsmaster would accept him as an apprentice? For choosing day was a pivotal point in the life of the castle wards. They were orphan children raised by the generosity of Baron Arnold, the lord of Redmont Fife. For the most part their parents had died in the service of the fief, and the Baron saw it as his responsibility to care for and raise the children of his former subjects, and to give them an opportunity to improve their station in life wherever possible. Choosing day provided that opportunity. Each year, castle wards turning 15 would apply to be an apprentice to the masters of the various crafts that served the castle and its people. Ordinarily, craft apprentices were selected by dint of their parents' occupations or influence with the craft masters. The castle wards usually had no such influence, and this was their chance to win a future for themselves. Those wards who weren't chosen, or for whom no openings could be found, would be assigned to farming families in the nearby village, providing farm labor to raise the crops and animals that fed the castle inhabitants. It was rare for this to happen, Will knew. The Baron and his craft masters usually went out of their way to fit the wards into one craft or another. But it could happen, and it was a fate he feared more than anything. Horace caught his eye now and gave him a smug smile. "Still planning on applying for battle school, Will?" he asked through a mouthful of turkey and potatoes. "Better eat something then. You'll need to build yourself up a little." He snorted with laughter, and Will glowered at him. A few weeks previously Horace had overheard Will confiding to Alice that he desperately wanted to be selected for battle school, and he had made Will's life a misery ever since, pointing out on every possible occasion that Will's slight build was totally unsuited for the rigors of battle school training. The fact that Horace was probably right only made matters worse. Where Horace was tall and muscular, Will was small and wiry. He was agile and fast and surprisingly strong, but he simply didn't have the size that he knew was required of battle school apprentices. He had hoped against the hope, for the past few years, that he would have had what people called his growing spurt before the choosing day came around, but it had never happened, and now the day was nearly here. As Will said nothing, Horace sensed that he had scored a verbal hit. This was a rarity in their turbulent relationship. Over the past few years he and Will had clashed repeatedly. Being the stronger of the two, Horace usually got the better of Will, although very occasionally Will's speed and agility allowed him to get in a surprise kick or a punch, and then escape before Horace could catch him. But while Horace generally had the best of their physical clashes, it was unusual for him to win any of their verbal encounters. Will's wit was as agile as the rest of him, and he almost always managed to have the last word. In fact, it was his tendency that often led to trouble between them. Will was yet to learn that having the last word was not always a good idea. Horace decided now to press this advantage. "You need muscle to get into battle school, Will. Real muscles," he said, glancing at the others around the table to see if anyone disagreed. The other wards, uncomfortable at the growing tension between the two boys, concentrated on their plates. "Particularly between the ears," Will replied, and unfortunately Jenny couldn't refrain from giggling. Horace's face flushed, and he started to rise from his seat. But Will was quicker, and he was already at the door before Horace could disentangle himself from his chair. He contented himself with hurling a final insult after his retreating wardmate. "That's right! Run away, Will No Name! You're a no name, and nobody will want you as an apprentice!" In the anteroom outside, Will heard the parting sally, and felt blood flush to his cheeks. It was a taunt he hated most. Although he had tried never to let Horace know that, sensing that he would provide the bigger boy with the weapon if he did. The truth was, nobody knew Will's second name. Nobody knew who his parents had been, unlike his year-mates who had lived in the Fife before their parents had died, and whose family histories were known. Will had appeared virtually out of nowhere, as a newborn baby. He had been found wrapped in a small blanket and placed in a basket on the steps of the ward building 15 years ago. A note had been attached to the blanket, reading simply, "His mother died in childbirth. His father died a hero. Please care for him. His name is Will." That year there had been only one other ward. Alice's father was a cavalry lieutenant who had died in the battle at Hackham Heath when Morgar's army had been defeated and driven back to the mountains. Alice's mother, devastated by her loss, succumbed to a fever some weeks after giving birth, so there was plenty of room in the ward for the unknown child, and Baron Arald was at heart a kindly man. Even though the circumstances were unusual, he had given permission for Will to be accepted as a ward of the castle of Redmont. It seemed logical to assume that, if the note was true, Will's father had died in the war against Morgarath, and since Baron Arald had taken a leading part in that war, he felt duty bound to honor the unknown father's sacrifice. So Will had become a Redmont ward, raised and educated by the Baron's generosity. As time passed, the others had gradually joined him, and Alice until there were 5 in their year group. But while the others had memories of the parents, or, in Alice's case, people who had known them and who could tell her about them, Will knew nothing of his past.